Dr. Jazz.
Thanks that you emailed me,
Dr.
actually.
Jazz.
You were on the list to do already, but there are so many players, and I didn't know you have a new album out, so it's quite cool that I've listened to your music for quite a long time, ever since Joey Barron's record. So it's and
Oh, wow.
Norah's, of course, but I guess we'll get there. But I wanted to start our talk with Spry, and I was cooking lunch today and listened to it, and it's just I had to stop every now and then because it's such a sincere record, in a sense that there's like no sincere was the adjective that came to me, like an honest and no ego, in a sense. And it's like how did you envision this record? I mean, what's the story behind it? And especially writing the tunes. I mean, the tunes are beautiful, by the way. I mean, I love everything.
Oh, man, thanks so much. Um, Gosh, there was there was some time last year in the springtime, I guess, when I started to think about that it was time to make a new record. Uh, and I kind of go back and forth a little bit. Like I also sing and write
Yeah.
songs, so I kind of go back and forth. I'll make a singing record. I'll make a more of a jazz instrumental record, and then and kind of go back and forth. And I was definitely feeling overdue for an instrumental record, a jazz record. And I just started writing kind of as a challenge to myself.
Mm.
If I don't set up some kind of uh, goal
Deadline.
for
Yeah, yeah.
myself,
We're all the
I'm
same.
not some. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
When I look back at periods when I've been the most productive, it's always either when I give myself some kind of thing, like I'm going to write a tune a week, or uh, for some past projects, I would just book the studio.
Mm.
And even if I didn't have any music, if I booked a studio date and hired a band, I knew that my brain, my not even my brain, my myself wouldn't let me show up empty-handed at the recording studio, So sometimes that works for me, but in this case, what I had decided was I'm going to write a tune a day
Mm. Okay.
for as long as it takes until I feel like I have enough good material that could make sense together. And so at the same time, I was also like checking out other guitar players' trio records
Mm.
because I wanted to get an idea, first of all, of like what they sounded like, even like not sounded like, oh, what pedals are they
Yeah.
using, or that kind of thing, but just even in space, like if you have three people, one thing you can do is it's just mono and everybody's here. Some records you listen to, maybe the guitar is in the middle and
Yeah.
you push the bass and the drums out to the side, or you put the drums in the middle and the all that stuff. I was really curious, like, okay, what is right now, this is in 2022, what's happening in trio records? So
Who
of
did you
course I
listen to?
listened. Oh, okay. So, well, I listened to some Julian Lage because he's
Okay.
been making trio records, right? So, I listened to Arclight, and I'm trying to think what was his most current one. as of a year ago. Maybe the one that has "Love Hurts" on it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's another one
So I was listening
actually.
to
Yeah,
what's that?
I think there's another one actually, but yeah,
Yeah, right. I feel like there's maybe
yeah,
three.
yeah, yeah.
So I was listening to those records. I listened to Molly Miller. She has a trio record out that I was listening to. Wolfgang Muthspiel
Mm.
had a recent record out with Scott Colley and Brian
Yeah, that's a
Blade, I
beautiful
think.
one. Yeah,
Uh, Jakob Bro.
yeah,
I mean, more recently he's done kind of more ambitious things with more people on them, but he has a trio record called "Who Said Gay Perry." Do you know that
yeah, yeah.
record?
I have all of his records. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I love his stuff. It's beautiful, brand.
And then, some more kind of electric-y stuff like Adam Rogers' Dice
Mm,
record.
really? Okay.
Uh, and, uh, I'm sure some other ones that I'm not thinking of, but I've tried to, listen to records of recent times. In other words, not going back and listening to, Barney Kessel with the
Yeah,
poll winners or
sure.
something, but trying to listen to like what records sound like now. And that was partly from a sonic idea, but of course, you listen to records, you get also ideas about tunes and uh, forms
Yeah,
and all these things. It's music is funny that way. Like you can start listening to records with one intention, where really I was thinking about how the record would sound, and at the same time I'm listening to players playing, and I'm listening to writers writing. So all of that stuff kind of filtered in, and um, I was talking with Joey in advance of making the record, and he said something that definitely kind of moved the direction of the boat of what I was writing, which sometimes when I'm writing, I it's kind of like I'm giving myself challenges
mm,
of stuff that I'm working on. Not to compare myself to John Coltrane, but I imagine that Giant Steps, to him, he didn't think of that as I'm going to write a tune. It was like an
yeah,
exercise
yeah,
from the
yeah,
practice room,
yeah.
something he was woodshedding, and he found a way to turn it into music. And so I've written a lot of tunes that way that had to do with, some challenge, either a technical challenge or playing over certain sets of changes. But Joey, I spoke with him after I had started writing the music, but I was just getting going, and he asked me like what the music was like, and I didn't quite know what to tell him. And he really encouraged me to play to my strengths, which is different than writing Giant Steps, where you're
Mm,
like, I want to write a tune so that I can kind of learn how to conquer some musical challenge by turning it into a tune. It was Joey was kind of more encouraging me to like think about the stuff that isn't like that, but maybe had more to do with what my voice is, or what my
mm-hmm,
strengths are. So,
mm,
I think a lot of the writing came out of that conversation.
mm. Did you know that Larry's gonna be on bass? Like when you wrote the
Yeah, I
music,
knew.
or yeah, okay,
I do. I spent a couple of months thinking about who I wanted to ask, even really before I had gotten into the writing part of it. I mean,
yeah,
it, it started to flow together, but yeah, I knew I wanted Larry, and it took me a minute to figure out that Joey was the right guy. But once that clicked in my brain, then the record already was taking shape, even though I didn't have a lot of the music, figured out yet.
mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, it helps, right? If you know you have Larry on bass, I think that solves like half of the tunes. It's like, okay, Larry solo here, and Larry solo's gonna be there. So it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I got that covered. No, I mean, that's how I usually am. You have, I don't know, John Hebert and Gerald Cleaver, or who else. Like, okay, I think I'm gonna feature him there and there and there and there, and that's gonna contribute so much to the music. It's like, uh, and Larry's featured
Yeah.
a lot actually. I mean, not necessarily even as a solo. It's just like as a group. Also, you sound, he and the mix you mentioned. It's really beautiful. Also, Joey's so nicely heard, like what he does on the brushes, and really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. When you have a band like that, the thing that Joey was telling me to play to my own strengths in the writing also really includes everybody. Then it
Mhm.
becomes like a question of, writing stuff that plays to everybody's strengths. Uh, it's it's really powerful once it's when your nugget of an idea is I want to make a trio record. There's not much there. It's just like a
Mhm.
blank piece of paper. And once you start to imagine the people that are going to be there, a lot starts to come
Yeah,
together
true.
pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you are you planning to play this material live with these two guys, or I mean, because they're like probably the super busiest players.
Right. So that really was like the the downside. I mean, I really from the get-go I thought of this as like a dream band and a dream project. The downside is it's pretty hard to get those guys. I mean, so far we haven't been able to play again. So, like we
Mm.
recorded this record August of last year, and we haven't played together since. I did do a show in New York recently with Larry on bass and Kenny Wollesen
Oh
on
wow,
drums.
beautiful. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of a different thing. Like you wouldn't mistake on a recording, Kenny's playing for Joey's playing. They're
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
different, but there was so much connection there because Kenny and Larry both came up in California around the same time, and were in the Bay Area around the same time, and so they have a lot of history as musicians and just as friends. And I don't think they've played together any time recently, but
Yeah, yeah.
Kenny, I've known Kenny since 89 or 90.
Wow.
I've known Larry a long time. So that it really felt like a, because like it's possible to put a band together that is exciting because there's none of that. You get strangers in a room and something really electric can happen, as
Mm.
people are learning how to relate to what the other people are doing. There's a lot of listening. And what happened with Kenny and Larry was a little bit of that because they hadn't played together, much in recent times, but there was a nice level of comfort and just so much trust,
Mm.
really. I felt in a way, and Kenny actually said this to me on the gig. He's like, I just feel like I can do no wrong. And I mean, he was talking about himself, but I felt the same thing. I was just like, I
Yeah.
was almost like in a dream where I could fly, or had some kind of special superpower or something. Because just and the superpower was really just one word, which is trust.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I hope you make it with one sort of a lineup to Europe or to promote this record, or would be beautiful to hear you guys. But that's another story, like getting a tour together. I know it's yeah. another
Where are
beast.
you based? Where's home for
I'm
you?
in Slovenia in Europe. Yeah, I mean, I had quite a big tour last year with Bob Moses on drums and Ariel Thunderson on bass, and you know, it took me 2 years to get the tour together. We had like 17 gigs, but like so many venues closed in Europe as well, and it's like, but you know, it's still doable, especially if you could get like Larry or and Kenny on the board. That's a big plus for promoters, you know. So let's see.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. But Adam, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned the Bay Area, and you're coming from California, and uh, what were the main triggers you before you mentioned like you know Barney Kessel and I know let's say early 80s or mid 80s there were so many players coming up and so many were already established like but what got you excited for the direction you're kind of moving in like let's say jazz you basically I mean you remember was there like a record or a moment a concert you saw that you said like oh shit I want to go there.
Yeah. Um, I think there were. Well, you said a record or a concert, and I can think of two, and there's some overlap.
Mm.
Actually, two or three. I'll keep it short.
No,
But
please go
I'll
go.
just mention. Like I remember when Mark Johnson had his Bass Desires group. Uh, there was a version of that group with Bill Frisell and John Schofield, I think.
Yeah,
The record that had Samurai Hee Haw
yeah, yeah.
on it. And I really, I'd have to look to see when that record came out, but I want to say it was mid 80s.
It's like 86, 85, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
So for me, I'm like 19 or 20 at that time, still really searching for a sound. I had been studying the more kind of classic players like Joe Pass and Barney Kessel and Kenny Burrell.
Mm.
Um, and those were in jazz. I guess those were kind of the guys that I was aware of. But I would read guitar magazines, like Guitar Player, especially, and you'd read about these newer voices on the scene, like John Schofield and Bill Frisell. Uh, so when I saw the Bass Desires record, I thought, oh, that's a chance I can actually check out two players for the price of just one record. So that's cool. And I listened to that a lot, and I love how, I mean, you can tell that the players know lots about, jazz language and jazz harmony, but yet some of the tunes are a lot more folksy,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
I guess I had also gotten some of that maybe from uh, some of Pat Metheny's records. I listened to American Garage a fair
Yeah.
bit, uh, and that just that kind of stuff. People weren't really using the term Americana back then, but I liked that aspect in jazz, and so that was already kind of rolling around in my brain. And then I remember in '89 I saw Bill Frisell's quartet when he had Hank Roberts and Kermit
Mm.
Driscoll and Joey Barron. I happened to see them just by chance. I got a friend of mine had a spare ticket to see them in LA when I was living in LA. That's where I grew up. And so when I was in '89, I would have been 23. I saw Bill play live, and up till
Mm.
that point, all of the like great guitar players that I had seen live were um, kind of people at jazz festivals. So uh, I can't even remember all the people I'd seen up to that point, but I hadn't seen people like close up really like that. Seeing somebody like when I was a kid, the Playboy Jazz Festival that happens at the
Yeah.
Hollywood Bowl. It's a pretty well-known festival, and of course, like genuinely thrilling. I saw Jaco Pastorius play there. I saw Nina Simone play there. I saw David Sanborn with Hiram Bullock on
Oh,
guitar.
wow.
Like, so I saw a lot of great stuff, but it was different when I saw Bill at this pretty small place in, I said LA, but really Santa Monica. It was a small place called At My Place. That was the name of the club. And then I could really feel the energy in the room around what Bill was playing on the
Mm.
guitar. The record he had, this was like around Before We Were Born, I
Yeah.
think was
Yeah. Yeah.
the
I love
record
them.
that they
Yeah.
were touring. So that made a huge impact on me, just being in a room with, instead of you know five five or 10,000 people, I'm in a room with maybe 150 people or whatever. And that was unforgettable to me. That
Hmm.
really was a moment that rewired my brain to, like, oh, guitar can be like that, and like that meaning it can be textural.
Hmm.
You can put a lot of care into the shape of every note. Um, you can write music that plays to your strengths again, rather than playing Stella by Starlight or something.
Hmm.
You can say you can write music around your voice. And then a couple years later, I remember going back to Mark Johnson. He made a trio record with Ben Monder
Okay.
and Arto Tunsaboyasin.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's called
Right
Right Brain
Brain
Patrol.
Patrol. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
And
beautiful
that
record.
record really hit me hard. I was like, when I heard that record, I didn't want to play Stella by Starlight ever again. Um, of course, I have, but uh,
Sure.
uh, I just thought, wow, this is such a fresh sound, and um, yeah, that record. I don't even know if it's in print, or I mean, if it's on the streamers. I look for it sometimes, and it seems like it's one that's hard to find.
Yeah.
So if people can find that record, so those are kind of like my big aha moments, and two of them concern Bill Frisell, and two of them concern Mark Johnson. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah,
No, but I totally get you with Frizzell. For me, it's also like I saw him live so many times, and for me, it was also like the way I lead bands. It's just like, and also how he does it. It's just like it's about the music. There's no ego. He's like the anti, you know, guitar hero. He can play a G chord, and it sounds just like, man, how does this G chord sound like that? It's just like, and then then I watched him, and I was like, I came home, I played the same G chord. I was like, nah, shit, that's and I don't know, it's just his voice, like you said, and I was blown away always. Also, I'm the same, like Frizzell was for me. Amazing, yeah.
yeah. Like even like they're on the first Nora record, Bill plays guitar on a song called "The Long Day Is Over,"
Hmm.
and it's just three or four chords. Like it's in D flat, but I think he plays it in C with the capo, and it's like F major 7 C, F major 7 C, E minor F, G or G sus back to C. And we all know those chords. I don't think he ever gets past the first few frets, and he's just playing guitar. There's some tremolo, and he's kind of, it's the simplest thing, but if you try to make your guitar sound like that, it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
at first, when I was younger, I tried to copy him. Like I bought a Klein guitar back when he was playing a Klein guitar. I had a Digitech delay pedal. I had a Ernie Ball volume pedal. And eventually, I mean, eventually he moved away from those things, but also I finally uh, came around to like, well, the lesson here isn't, you know, to use the same tools, but just think about how personal he's making it
Hmm.
for him, and then try to find those own find those things about my own identity that I could lean into, because
Hmm.
that, you know, that's what it is.
Sure.
um, I heard somebody say this the other day, and I can't remember who, but they were talking about like early blues players, like in the 30s, and you know they all sound so different. You know, we just call it blues. You
Hmm.
know, and as if everybody's doing the same thing, but those players, in a way, being able to make a living, they had to be able to do some stuff that nobody else could do.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's what defined them. That's what that was their calling card. That was how they made a living. And so to whatever extent, it's a lot harder, I think, now
Yeah.
to do that, because you know we hear everybody and we see everybody and we get excited and want to borrow what people are doing. But to whatever extent you can find your thing and do that, I think that's what we're supposed to do, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah. 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 Makes complete sense. I mean, it's but I think with the last record, you're really kind of get the idea that's you. Like, uh, that's what I meant when we started, like with sincere, and it's really like there's no shit. I have to play this fast line just to show that I can play this fast line. You know, it's and that's what makes it so good, because it's like, oh man, it's beautiful. It's just, you know, I like that. It's so important. I get there are so many players I cannot listen to anymore. When I was younger, I loved them, but now it's like I will not even go into names, but you know, some heroes of the 70s fusion, let's put it like that. And
Yeah.
nowadays I'm like, oh shit, how could I listen to that? It's fast, but you know, but
Yeah.
yeah, uh,
Yeah.
but it's their voice as
uh
well, I guess, you know, so it's okay. It's
right. One other thing I think is worth mentioning about Spry is the way that we recorded it, and this was Joey's idea. When we got to the studio, he looked around and he said, I wonder if we could just all be in the room together
yeah, I saw that in the pic, yeah.
and not wear headphones, and just that, I think, it helps keep everybody honest. When you're in a different room with headphones on,
Yeah.
with a glass door in between you, for me anyway, it's easier to fall into some of that, you know, what should I play, or
Hmm.
you know, what am I supposed to be doing here? But whereas when you're in a room with two other people and like just a few steps away from each other, and playing fairly quietly, I just would get so into what everyone else was doing. It, it really helped keep me from even focusing too much on any one part of what I was doing, because I was just in the room with these guys. And
Hmm.
when I wanted to say something, I didn't have to like push a button or get up and walk out and go talk to Larry. Like he was just right there. I could talk about as loud as I'm talking now, and that was all that was required. And if we wanted to cue something, it was very clear,
Yeah,
and um, I mean, it should be obvious, like, of course, like, because that's a lot more like what we do on stage.
absolutely. Yeah,
But the tendency in studios is to not to do that, is to do what works for that environment, which tends to be headphones and isolation and stuff.
true. Yeah, yeah. I agree. That's why studio is sometimes really like, oh shit, loses some of the magic, right? I mean, it can be cool, but yeah, the magic can be gone really fast. So it's uh,
Uh, The trio that you mentioned with Bob Moses, did you make a record with that group?
yeah, yeah, we did. And we did like a studio one and a live one, and the live one is like you know, way more exciting because I recorded a couple of gigs on the tour, and then I chose, like, I'm just mixing it now, and it's completely different. It's like, you know, you're like 5 feet away from Bob, and Arnold is there, and it's like, oh shit, man. Ooh, you know, these are like guys who played in 1969, one with, I don't know, Eric Dolphy, and the other one with Sonny Rollins, and I'm like this kid there in the middle, like, shit, okay. And it's so funny because sometimes I just played the head, and then I went out, you know, and they just played. And I was like, oh shit, that's so beautiful. You know? I mean, I did join later, kind of, but sometimes I was just like, oh shit,
Uh-huh.
this is amazing, man. You know, it's
That's funny, right? Because you just want to listen.
yeah. So sometimes I was like, oh shit, maybe I should play. You know, I'm kind of the leader now or whatever. Like, but yeah, it's the live one is way more exciting. I mean, I prefer doing live records. It's just the mistakes. Even what is a mistake anyway? But you know, uh,
Right.
I mean, one of my favorite records is that one by Frizzell, the live one. You know, with Joey and Kermit, just the trio one. When
Incredible.
when the record starts, like with Bill saying, like, I can't see you, I can feel you, and then just the tune starts. It's like, oh fuck, man, that's amazing.
I forgot about that. He says, I can't see you, but I can feel you. That's what he
Yeah,
says.
yeah. I have goosebumps now, like, but I listen to that record so much. It's just, and then just the tune starts. It's like, oh man, so cool. But
Mm.
yeah, yeah. You have to check that record out again. So if it's really a nice one. It's still so strong even now after 30 years. It's like stands with every record out there. So cool.
Yeah, it's one of those records that I've owned and gotten really into and then given away, and then I forget about it because I don't have. It's like kind of a blurry cover, and
Yeah, 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 yeah,
is it
exactly.
from is it from Italy or Spain or
I think it's
something?
Spain from Sevilla or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm gonna see if I can. That's another one of those records that seemed like, at least when I tried to look for it a while back, it was hard to find
It's very hard to
online.
find. Yeah.
Like you have to find on somebody who's got one on eBay who's selling it or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. We're checking out though. I mean, I still have it as a CD. That's why you know, it's one of those go-to records. Always like, oh shit, I'll put this on.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna look around. I think I have a copy of it. I'm gonna dig into it again. Thank you for reminding me.
Sure. But Adam, I wanted to ask you. You know, we're talking about all these players like from Joey and Larry and Kenny Wollesen, and you've been a part of the New York scene for such a long time. Like, when did you decide to move from the West Coast, where you were actually quite active, to New York? What was the main trigger that you said, like, okay, I want to go to the East? And how was the
Yeah.
first weeks, let's say, or months when you came to New York?
um. Well, it, the first few weeks or months were really hard. I mean, I left San Francisco for New York in 1996,
Already? Oh wow.
and
Okay.
I don't think I lasted a year because um, I wasn't making any money. I couldn't really find a permanent place to live. I was just kind of um, couch surfing and subletting, and I had no gigs to speak of. I was doing some transcribing work
Hmm.
for some books for Hal Leonard, like just I was doing everything I could to make some money, but almost nothing really came from performing. And I was, not very confident. And of course, you show up. This is 1996, and Kurt Rosenwinkel would just be playing in like some small club, and you're just like, that's what it is. That's what people are doing now. Like not even going to see the legendary players that are a generation above us, but just you know guys in my generation when I showed up were like Kurt and Ben Monder
Yeah.
and Adam
Adam.
Rogers,
Yeah.
and I couldn't do anything like that. I mean, I was just like, oh my gosh. And so I wound up moving back to San Francisco for a little while,
Hmm.
and then I did that actually a couple of times. It took me it took me almost kind of like going back and forth almost 5 years
Oh wow.
before it
Okay.
finally took. And the only reason really that I stuck it out, I think, in the last time was I think I just got really tired of going back and forth, and you can't live in two places at once, or at
Sure.
least I can't. And and people can feel it if you're really here for New York, people feel that, and if you're not sure, then I think a lot of opportunities don't really come.
Hmm.
Uh, but by the last, by 2000 ish, 2001, something like that, I just started playing with Norah. There was nothing big happening. There was no, we were just playing like brunch gigs around New York, basically.
How did you meet Nora, by the way? What's how did that connection begin?
Uh, she and I both happened to be at a bar going to listen to Kenny Wollesen's band. He had a
Oh wow.
band for a
Okay.
while called the Wollesens,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she and I both happened to be at a show. And I don't know, I I do know kind of how Kenny met her, but I don't remember the whole story. But anyway, he knew her and he knew me, and Nora and I happened to be sitting next to each other at this bar, and Kenny introduced us.
Oh wow.
So that's how that started. Um, but yeah, eventually I just New York is really hard. Coming from San Francisco,
Yeah,
where I mean, now everybody knows San Francisco because of like the tech companies and stuff. It's a very
yeah,
expensive place. And even when I first got there in 89 or 90, it wasn't a cheap place to live, but you could find, if you just were looking to rent a room somewhere, it wasn't very expensive, and food wasn't expensive, and um, there was plenty of gigs, and so it was comfortable to
mm,
to live there. The weather is pretty nice, and I mean you could see why so many people want to live there. It's
sure.
a very nice environment. And for a little while, especially in the late 90s, it was just this incredible scene. Todd Sikafus was there. He was a
Oh
great
yeah,
bassist,
yeah, I know
composer. Jenny Scheinman, Ben Goldberg, um,
Scott Amendola,
Trevor
right?
Dunn. Sorry?
Scott Amendola also. He's from
Yeah,
drummer,
exactly.
right?
Scott
Yeah, yeah. All these
Amendola.
guys, yeah,
Yeah, right. Charlie Hunter, Scott Amendola, John Schad, Will
yeah, exactly.
Bernard. Um, so lots of great stuff going on, and but I kind of hit a point where all of the records that I was listening to were coming out of New York, and they
Yeah,
were made by New York players um, in New York studios with New York producers, and there were pictures of New York on the album covers, and I just thought, what am I waiting for? At that point I was already 30, and I thought if I don't do this now, I'm just then I need to let go and just decide, okay, I'm going to just live in the Bay Area and be happy because it's beautiful.
sure.
But if I wanted to get closer to the flame, I mean, I was like this moth that was 3,000 miles away from the flame, and I wanted to get a lot closer.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I wanted to ask you about, when we started this talk, I said I first heard you with Joey and with Nora's record, and "Come Away with Me." It's. I remember here in Slovenia, even it was like this new thing, and I love the guitar work. Lone Star and Painter and all this stuff. I mean, your guitar work is so beautiful what you do, and uh, how did that record come about? The making of that record, actually, and afterwards, especially when it came out, touring and playing with that group. What was that like for you? I mean, your experience.
Well, let's see. The way that that record was made, it's actually a bit of a mess, more than I think people appreciate. I mean, no, a mess is it's not quite the right word, but it was made in different uh,
Okay, studios and
sessions,
locations. Oh,
different
okay.
players, different, like when you listen to it, it feels so of a piece,
Mm,
that you kind of imagine that the whole thing was done in a week or two, or whatever you might imagine. But actually, it started when, before Nora got officially signed to Blue Note, they did kind of like a test recording with her where they asked her to just go in the studio without a producer and record a handful of tunes. And she did that.
okay.
And that's something that you can find. Blue Note released it as first sessions. And
Oh, okay.
that's something that you can
Yeah,
find.
I'll
It's
check it
not a
out.
bootleg, it's an official Blue Note thing. And it had a pretty solid version of Come Away With Me, and it had a pretty solid version of Don't Know Why,
Mm,
and some other songs. And I think Adam Rogers is on guitar on that session, I think, as well as Jesse Harris, who's
okay.
playing acoustic guitar and who wrote some of the songs. He wrote Don't Know Why.
Yeah.
So that's where it kind of starts, and then based on that, Blue Note said, "Oh wow, well, if you can do that, let's make a real record."
Mm,
And they gave her a budget, and she went into the studio and started working on a full length album, and that was with a producer named Craig Street, and he brought in Bill Frisell and Kevin Bright, and maybe had brought in Brian Blade,
okay.
sort of brought in players that he knew from his world, rather than relying on, like, Nora on her first sessions. it was just people that she knew from around the scene. I don't mean like just people, like amazing people, but people that were close to her that she knew and had worked with on the scene. When she got in the studio with Craig Street, he's now drawing from a bigger kind of picture of musicians because he'd been doing it for a while. Norah had only been in New York for a couple of years, and Craig Street had made lots of great records, and so he suggested certain players and had ideas for how to build out her songs. But when it was all done, I don't know the whole story because I wasn't there, but it didn't wind up sounding or feeling or whatever quite the way that maybe she or Blue Note were expecting. And so
Interesting.
now they've got this like first sessions thing, and they've got a bunch of songs recorded at a real studio with some amazing players and a great producer. But they're still not there yet. But Blue Note really believed in Norah and said, well, maybe we'll take some of what's already there. Maybe we'll record a few more things, maybe re-record a couple of things. And that's where I came in. Even though I already knew Norah and had been playing, like I
Okay.
said, I had already been playing like brunch gigs with her and stuff. But all this, when she got signed, all of this was happening at a time when I had moved back to California.
Ah, okay.
So I didn't, I was, when I was playing with her before this, they were just kind of like little fun gigs. And then I moved away and she got signed and all this stuff was happening. And when she got the opportunity to go back into the studio with a different producer, a guy named Arif Mardin, who he's passed away since then, but he was a pretty legendary producer, had produced a lot of records for Atlantic Records in the
Mm.
70s and 80s. Um, that's when she called me and she's like, "Hey, I'm making this record for Blue Note." I didn't know all the stuff I just told you. I didn't know all of that story. She said, "Hey, I'm making a record for Blue Note. I really would love to hear you on this record.
Mm.
Could you come back to New York and play?" So I did, and so we recorded Painter Song and Nightingale,
Yeah.
re-recorded Come Away With Me. Don't know why actually the original kind of like demo version is what you hear on the final record, but they
Mm.
did a few overdubs on it. I played
Interesting.
on Lone, and actually not on. I didn't take that slide solo on Lone Star. That's Tony Scher. Um, but yeah, I played on like maybe eight tunes on the record or
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. And then I didn't know what was going to happen after that. Like, you finish a record, and especially if it's something on a big label, the from the time you're done to the time it hits the streets, it has to go through a lot of
Yeah.
um, you know stuff. And I hung out in New York and I waited, and we were playing this weekly little gig at a place in New York with Norah, and that was a five-piece band that we were playing these weekly gigs with, where Jesse Harris was on acoustic guitar. I just played electric. Norah was playing piano. Lee Alexander was playing bass, and usually Dan Reeser on drums,
Mm.
sometimes other
Okay.
drummers. And then the record came out, and then she wanted to go out and play live, but at the beginning there wasn't the budget to take five people out. So she decided to do it without drums and with just one guitar. And she called me up and she's like, "Do you think you could play acoustic and electric, kind of do both?" And I said, "Sure," even though I didn't own an acoustic guitar at that time. But I said, I said, "Sure." Not only did I not own an acoustic, I barely knew anything about like finger picking or playing with a capo, all the stuff that acoustic guitar players know. I didn't know because I had been so jazz focused that I knew all my drop two voicings and
Yeah.
all the modes and stuff, but I couldn't play like a tune like Nightingale on
Hmm.
the first record as a really specific guitar part that if you don't play it,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like that song. Or don't know why. I mean, can you imagine if you just like wrote the names of the chords for "Don't Know Why" just on like a chord chart and handed it to a jazz guitar
Oh
player?
man.
It wouldn't sound
No,
anything like the
definitely not.
record.
Yeah.
And so I actually got together with Jesse Harris a couple of times and asked him to show me these parts, so that I could work on them. Because otherwise, I really had no idea. I even just by ear to sit and try to figure it out, it was like in a whole other language
Hmm.
from what I
Interesting.
knew on the guitar. And then, little by little, I became fluent, and I just had to figure out, which songs am I going to play on acoustic, which songs am I going to play on electric. Painter song, obviously, that's an acoustic guitar song, but a song like Nightingale starts on acoustic and then there's a guitar solo.
Hmm.
So I wound up playing the whole thing on electric because it just made sense. And eventually, Nora hired us, when there was more, when it was growing and there was more budget, she hired a drummer and she hired a second guitar player. And then it became really fun and colorful, and it was
Yeah.
really great.
Oh, wow. Did you then started to tour Europe as well? I mean, and beside the States, or
Yeah, we did. I forgot about that. At first, I mean, I was just picturing us driving around in a van around the States. But yeah, we did go to Europe. Um, I, I definitely remember an early gig we played at the Paradiso in Amsterdam.
okay, well,
And I'm pretty sure we played New Morning in Paris. Oh, no, we played La Cigale in Paris.
yeah, well,
And we played in London at the Pizza Express in Soho on Dean Street.
yeah,
And like those size rooms, and that was all I think before we had drums. It was just the trio for a while.
no, beautiful.
Uh, it was good training. I mean, basically if you're playing acoustic guitar in a band with no drums, you are the drummer.
Yeah,
And that was the first time I had been in that role in a band. I had always had the luxury in other bands of just getting to kind of float on top or play colors, and all of a sudden it was like, oh no, like I'm the until the drummer shows up, I'm the drummer in this band. So that was good training for me.
mm, beautiful. How did you, in the midst of all that, do Buttermilk Channel? You know, and I mean, I love that record. I listened to it. It's again, we're talking about Kenny Wallace and another Larry, but okay, Goldings this time. But how did you basically you started leading bands already then in New York immediately, or how did that one come about? I mean,
Yeah, it was funny how that band came together. Um, there was a brief period when so Larry Goldings, who's the organ player on Buttermilk Channel, has had a trio with Bill Stewart and Peter
mhm.
Bernstein kind of forever,
Yeah, true.
right? Uh, and there was a period where Peter Bernstein was playing with Joshua Redman,
Yeah.
and um, my friend Lee Townsend who's a record producer,
Hmm.
had recommended me to Larry so that Larry could maybe find another guitar player to keep the trio going while Peter
Mm.
Bernstein was on the road with Joshua Redmond. And I'm a really different player than Peter. And anyway, long story short, I got together with Larry and we played and we hung out and we had a great time. Uh, it never came to be that I, played in his trio. To this date, I've still actually never ever played with Bill Stewart,
Oh, really?
though I would love to. Bill
Oh,
Stewart, if you're watching, call me. Uh, but anyway, Larry and I became friends, and Kenny, as I mentioned, I had known previously. We
yeah.
we met in San Francisco in '89 or '90, and so this is like 10 years or something after that. And I thought it would be. I don't remember even how this started, but I thought it would be fun to have a kind of a toy organ trio, which Larry was already kind of doing. He had a melodica with a tube, so he could put the melodica on a table or a stand and play it, not with left hand, with his right. He could play the melodica with his right hand and blow into it. And then he had this little Yamaha keyboard, which he would set to the bass octave.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he had this little PV amp. It might have even been a battery powered amp. I can't remember, but something that you could easily put on a dolly and roll down the street and go on the subway with it. So he had this kind of toy organ setup, which was this, yeah, this melodica and a little Yamaha bass keyboard and a little amp. And I had my guitar and a Princeton reverb, and I think Kenny just brought like a ride cymbal and a snare drum. And we played a couple of gigs at this bookstore in in New York City. It was called Housing Works Bookstore Cafe, and we played a couple of gigs there, and it was so fun. Uh, just playing whatever. I don't think I was even writing tunes for the band at that point, but then I thought, man, I should make an organ trio record, but the way that I play,
Hmm.
so not like classic Blue Note record with, Big John Patton or Jimmy Smith or that, not that kind of sound, but talking about that Americana thing that I mentioned
Yeah.
before, like, Bill or Mark Johnson or Pat Metheny, like how could I bring that kind of atmosphere, but with the Hammond organ and drums? So that's when I started writing music for what became Buttermilk Channel.
Mm.
And I mean, the influences on there, I don't try to hide them. Like there's a tune on there called "Sphere of Influence." Sphere was Thelonious Monk's middle name, so it's pretty clear what I'm thinking about on
Hmm.
there. There's a song called "Dear John," which, of course, I was thinking about Schofield. There's a tune called "That's All She Wrote,"
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
was
The
thinking,
second one, yeah, that's a nice one.
yeah, I was thinking about Carla Bley
Ah.
when I wrote that. Uh, I love her music, and so uh, we made that record, and that was really my first record as a leader. And at that time, I didn't even try to tour because, I mean, you were asking me, like, how easy or how hard is it to get a tour together with Larry Grenadier and Joey Barron. But at that time, when I was recording Buttermilk Channel, Larry Goldings was playing with Michael Brecker,
Yeah, yeah.
and he was on the road a lot. And I can't remember exactly what Kenny was doing, but he was pretty busy too. So between their schedules and my own, again, just lack of confidence, that band never toured. I mean, we barely played any gigs
Oh,
after
wow.
that. Like
Really?
we just made the record. I would have loved it if that group had played, you know, a tour or a week at the Vanguard or
Hmm.
anything. But I really kind of shot myself in the foot because I made what I now appreciate was a really good record.
Yeah.
And once it was done, I just kind of let it go, and then I got busy with doing, playing with Norah was getting more of a time consuming thing, and um, it's hard. I mean, even today, even like not literally today, like Wednesday, but
Yeah.
uh, in this moment, I'm like I don't have a booking agent or a manager or anything. It's just all me. And so when you say it took you 2 years to put together 17 tour dates with your trio, I totally relate to that
Yeah.
and admire that. And maybe that's what I should be doing right now is thinking about 2025 or
Yeah.
26.
Yeah. I mean, 2 years. I mean, like, the first gig I got, like, that was a really well-paid gig, was booked 19 months ahead. And then like that was a nucleus because that was a well-paid gig, and then like half a year later, I got three more gigs, and then kind of slowly was like, I mean, that's how I've done it through the years always. Like, but you need like one really well-paid gig that you're like, okay, shit, that's gonna cover at least the travel expenses, and it's a good start. And
Right, right.
yeah, it's heavy. Yeah, it's heavy. But yeah, but it's funny. Like there's like this group of players like Schofield and Pat Metheny, and they're there, and then it's like this whole bunch of players who are incredible composers and band leaders and guitarists, and yet it's so hard to get a tour together, right? I find that so something is wrong either with the system or some, I don't know.
Yeah.
No idea.
I mean, a thing that I have been doing is, going and playing with people that are part of local scenes. Like,
Hmm.
I went to Nashville a couple weeks ago and played a trio gig uh, with guys that I know in Nashville that
Like
have
that,
no
yeah.
direct relation to this record, but we played all of this music. And then in New York, I couldn't get Joey because he's still living in Berlin,
Yeah.
and so I can't. If I had a week at the Vanguard, I could, maybe fly him out. But just to play a one night show
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Brooklyn,
sure.
it didn't make sense. And then I'm going to California at the end of September to play four shows with actually with a trio that I had uh, when I was living there for a while. Really incredible rhythm section, and so I'll play with those guys. And then in December, I'm going to Chicago for a one show, and I'm going to play with Chicago guys,
That's a
and
nice way
so on.
also. Yeah.
So that helps kind of it's a way to get the music out there
Yeah.
and to keep the energy going. But um, would I love to just play a string of dates, with the same band? Yes, like so much. I mean, the irony when I was touring with Norah, I had steady income and job security and a real easy hook, to talk to promoters. Like,
Hmm.
at that time she was a multi-platinum, chart-topping artist, and I was featured in her band. And between the people being aware of me and also having to not worry so much about the tour making a profit or whatever. Like I could have at that time maybe more easily done a trio tour. But
Mm-hmm.
the irony was I was also so busy that I I barely would have had any time
Sure.
to do that. I had time to make records, but I kind of needed to keep my calendar open for what that gig entailed. And now I left Nora's band in 2007. Uh, I still mention it in my bio, but it's not such a big hook, I don't think, to say to a record promoter, "Oh, this is what I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago." It's like, and I also don't have the same kind of, you know, I, now I want the tour to just, it has to pay for itself. I don't have like another gig that could help support it or
Sure, sure.
whatever.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh, but at the same time, like I was saying about, when you asked me about moving to New York, and like I feel all these years into my career, I mean, geez, I'll be 57 this year. If I don't make some of these things happen, like they just aren't, like nobody's gonna just hand me a tour.
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
build it, and maybe it takes 19 months of planning, like you said, and uh, but I have to as soon as as soon as we end this
Yeah,
Zoom
you start sending
meeting,
emails,
like
right?
I got to start sending some emails because it's taken me a long time to like believe in myself and believe
Mm.
in my music, and I wish I had more hubris when I was doing 20, 30 years ago when I first started making records or writing music and then
Mm.
making records as a leader. Um, but I'm trying. I'm trying to catch
No,
up
no,
now.
but on the other hand, even as someone, let's say, like as Ben Monder, right? He I don't think maybe he had one or two European tours as a band leader, actually, which I always find like, you know, I feel so bad when I have a European tour and he didn't. I'm like, and I studied his music and everything, or like, I'm like, shit, man, it's not cool, it's, I mean, but uh, yeah. But Adam, I just wanted to ask you, one thing also, like, how did you end up playing with Joey, with Killer Joey? I mean, you and Joey have obviously a really long musical relationship, but how did that story begin with that group?
Oh, yeah, thanks for asking. I think I think it happened because of Tony Scher, the
Okay.
bass player. Um, Joey had, at this point, like we're talking about maybe 99-ish, had made a few. I mean, he had been part of Bill Frisell's group for a lot of years already at that point, and he had made a few records as a leader. He made this really great record called Down Home
Yeah, that's beautiful.
with, is it Arthur Blythe?
Arthur Blythe. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Arthur Blythe and Bill and Ron.
Ron
Is it Ron?
Carter. I think it's Ron Carter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And, he found himself in the same boat as what we're talking about. It's like to get Ron Carter and Arthur Blythe and Bill on a tour as a leader, it's going to be an expensive undertaking unless you have like a record company behind you just throwing lots of resources at that. And so Joey wanted to continue in the vein of that, what he was doing with Down Home, but have a group that was a little, easier to get in a van or on a
mm,
plane. So he asked Tony Scher to play bass, and he asked Steve Cardenas to play guitar, And then when he was looking for a fourth person, I guess Tony recommended me. I had met Tony the first gig I played in New York when I first moved here in '96 was with Tony, who I
Mm.
had met through Kenny Wollesen because I knew Kenny, back in San Francisco in the early '90s, and he moved to New York before me. So when I got to New York, I like the only phone number really I even had when I got here was Kenny, and Kenny was playing with Sex Mob every
Oh
week
yeah.
at the
Oh, that's
Knitting
how you ended
Factory.
with the sax mop as well. Okay.
Right. So
Ah,
Sex
okay.
Mob was playing every single week. I forget which night. I'm going to say it was a Tuesday night. I don't remember. But at that time, the Knitting Factory had a space. They had three different stages, but one of the stages was called the Tap Bar. And that was all residencies. Every Monday was one band, same band. Every Tuesday was a
Mm.
different band. And that just went on and on. And Sex Mob was there. And that's how I met Stephen Bernstein and Tony Scher, and they basically Stephen. It was funny. It was like basically said, look, we don't need a guitar player, but you are welcome to come down anytime you want to and just play with us. And that
Mm.
amazingly led to me being on their first record,
Yeah.
which is called Din, the Din of Inequity,
Yeah.
uh, which is on Knitting Factory Records. And I'm just on a couple songs, but that came out of just hanging out because I knew Kenny. And so Tony Scher had recommended me for some other gig, which was my first paid gig in New York. And that's how I knew Tony. And then you just it's a fairly small scene even now. Like
Yeah.
there's just you would think that there's 10,000 guitar players and 8,000 bass players and whatever, and that's probably true. But the folks that are really out there doing it all the time, it was very small. So anyway, Tony recommended me to Joey, and after the first or second gig, I remember him calling me up and saying basically, man, I really love what you're doing, keep doing it, but I wonder if either you or Steve has another guitar besides a 335, because I guess maybe he was recording the shows and listening to them that
Mm-hmm.
we were when we were playing, and he just felt it was a little too much of one kind of guitar sound. Steve and I were
Yeah.
both playing 335s through little Fender Deluxe reverbs or whatever, and so I borrowed a friend's guitar. I think it was a Fernandez Telecaster, and played that for a while. And I think on the Killer Joey record, I'm playing that
Yeah, it's
Telecaster.
a Telecaster. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
which looking back, I had not yet figured out how to get a really good sound on a Telecaster, but at least it achieved the mission, which is that it was sounded
Yeah.
different from what Steve was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that combo with Steve, and it's. I mean, you mentioned funny, like Frizzell and Bass Desires and Schofield. This is also like a two guitar group, obviously, but completely different. I mean, it's just it couldn't be more different than,
Yeah.
but yet still the same. Also in you know. But I love you and Steve. Yeah, I mean, it's two really strong voices on guitars. Beautiful.
And I still have a group kind of like that. I have this group with a pedal steel guitarist named Rich Hinman.
Mm.
And we've already made one record that's out in the world that's called Verses. It's on Bandcamp if people want to find it. And we've finished another record which will be out, I think, the beginning of next year. And that's called Fan Favorites.
Right, right.
And Rich plays a little bit of like, straight guitar on it, but mostly pedal steel is what he does. So, and both of us, you know, spent a fair bit of time listening to those Bass Desires records. Rich is a little younger than me, so I think his kind of entree into that actually was the Pat Metheny, John Scofield record, I Can See Your House From Here,
Yeah, that's a beautiful one. Yeah.
which is a great record, but chronologically just a few years after the Bass Desires stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Uh,
Yeah.
Adam, like besides sending emails for tours, what's on the schedule for you? I mean, like until the end of the year, or what are the projects? I mean, I saw you're active again with vocalists with Liz Wright. You're doing something, but what's on your calendar for the upcoming months or weeks or?
Yeah. Well, coming up, I have a couple of live shows with Liz Wright. We're playing in kind of the Midwest, you could say, Chicago and Indianapolis, and then that's just a couple of shows, and then I'm going to go out to California to
Hmm.
do these kind of record release trio shows, but with my West Coast trio. If anybody's interested, it's with David Pilch on bass and Jake Reed on drums. They're great musicians.
Hmm.
And then after that, I'm going to Berklee College of Music in Boston to be like a special guest uh, teacher for a week. The first week
Oh,
of
wow,
October,
beautiful.
I'll be in Boston. Uh, and then I've got a couple more West Coast dates with a group called Sammy Miller and the Congregation. That's a really great group of younger players uh, that are just um, fantastic. A lot of energy, a lot of fun. Um, just a couple of gigs in New York. I have a band called the Mint Imperials where I sing my songs. Besides playing jazz, I'm also a singer songwriter. So that band is playing a couple of shows, and then uh, in towards the end of October, Todd Sikafus, the
Hmm.
bassist and composer, has a tour also on the West Coast. We're going
Oh,
to
wow,
play from
beautiful.
Seattle into Portland and San Francisco and LA. Um, Todd made this record 8 years ago
Wow.
that's called Bear Proof. Bear like a bear proof. And we recorded it, and it's a long story, but it's taken 8 years to put it out. And
Wow.
anyway, it's finally out. He's released already a couple of singles, and the whole thing will be out soon. And so that band is going to go
Oh,
on
how
tour.
fantastic.
That's an incredible band with uh, Ben Goldberg on clarinet
Oh, wow.
and
Nice.
Jenny Scheinman, and a lot of Bay Area
Kind
people
of
really.
tiny resistors continuance, like
Yeah,
what you did, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
essentially
Okay.
a Tiny Resistors band,
Yeah, yeah.
but this particular thing is called Bear Proof. It's this big through composed. He got a grant from I think from a chamber music society, and he wrote this like 75-minute through
Woo.
composed suite.
Wow.
Uh,
I
and
have to
so
check it out.
that's just like in the next 30, all the stuff I just mentioned is like in the next 30 days. It's a lot of different things, all with people that I love as people and as musicians. And I could go on, but those are the projects that are coming up
Beautiful. Yeah.
on the horizon. Yeah.
Man, super. It's good to see you being busy. So that's nice, man. So yeah. But Adam, man, I'll let you go now. So leave you be. But this is so nice that we hooked up and got to chat a little. It's nice to hear your story lately.
Yeah, really nice to talk with you. Really, uh, yeah, beautiful conversation.
Yeah,
Thanks for the time.
yeah.
Dr. Jazz.